Environments webinar, which is hosted by ourselves at NEUPC on behalf of all UK UPC members. Those of you who have not sort of come across me before, I'm Sam Wells. I'm the category manager at NEUPC for soft facilities management and furniture. And today we're joined by Darren and Lee from SouthernsBroadstock, who have kindly offered their time to help us understand how we can make university spaces more conducive to learning and working across a diverse range of people. Everybody's cameras and microphones are on mute for the duration of the meeting. So can I just ask that if you do have any questions, which there will be time for at the end, if you put them in the chat box, I can collate them and I'll ask them at the end. But for now, I'll hand over to Darren, who's just going to do a quick introduction on SouthernsBroadstock before handing over to Lee. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hopefully everybody can hear me. As Sam said, I'm just going to. My name is Darren Kelly from SouthernsBroadstock, and I was just going to take just a couple of minutes just for a very brief introduction to SouthernsBroadstock for anybody who's not familiar with who we are and what we do. And then I'll very quickly hand over to Lee to talk you through our Inclusive Environment and Enhancing Student Experience webinar, which is far more engaging than anything I can tell you. So yeah, just a brief introduction, as I say, to SouthernsBroadstock for anybody who's not familiar with who we are and what we do. So what do we do? We research, design, manufacture and deliver solutions to optimize space, enhance user experience and drive productivity. And that's across many sectors, but I suppose where we're probably best known is in the higher education market, hence being on the framework. How do we do this? So if you could just move to the next slide, Lee, that'd be great. Thank you. So yeah, so as I mentioned, we're not just about items of furniture, albeit that's a core part of what we do. We're a research-led business, which is, you know, exactly what Lee's going to talk us through today, is sort of how we've arrived at the knowledge base that we've got, and we believe in sort of thought leadership and sharing knowledge and ideas. So we like to form partnerships with our customers and collaborations that look at everything from research, design, planning, inclusivity, the manufacturing process of products as well, looking specifically at things like sustainability during that manufacturing process, and then right through to the back end of the process, I suppose, which is efficient project management, delivery and installation of furniture and projects, and then that crucial aftercare piece, sort of post installation of furniture. So that's how we like to work with customers throughout that entire journey. And just onto the next slide. So what do we do as a business, and what do we believe that makes us hopefully unique in the marketplace? So some of you may be aware that we're a manufacturer in our own right. So we manufacture in Bolton and Macclesfield. So our own ranges of furniture. That has its advantages in terms of being able to control things like supply chain, but also we're small enough to still be agile with bespoke things like bespoke furniture requests and specials, which, as I say, gives us a fairly unique place in the marketplace that we can do that for our customers and work to satisfy any needs. But we're also a dealer as well, so we work with many of the biggest brands in the furniture industry, so people like Orange Box, Boss, and recently become a Herman Miller authorized dealer. So that balance of the two offerings, we believe, sits us well in the marketplace to be able to offer a complete project with obviously inclusive environments in mind. So yeah, that's just a brief introduction as we are. It's not we don't want to make this a sales pitch. This is about a thought leadership piece and Lee sharing what research he's done. So I'll hand over to Lee at this stage.
Thank you very much, Darren. So hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Lee Hansford, so I'm the head of creative design at SouthernsBroadstock. As Darren said, there's kind of two elements to my role. One is sort of working alongside clients, developing briefs and solutions on the back of that to ultimately deliver projects and deliver all the requirements of that project for the client and the individual and the end user. And then the other side of it is research, thought leadership, looking at trends, what's current, what do we need to do to innovate and keep on track and keep ourselves and our clients ahead of the game, essentially. Where do we need to be looking? So that's essentially where this piece on inclusive environments and student experience comes from. So I guess the kind of first question is, why inclusive environments? Why are we talking about this now? So, I've been involved for about 10 years in this industry, and you see lots of trends come and go, but inclusive environments really seems to have stuck. The overall theory has been around for 30 plus years, but obviously we've seen that acceleration and interest since COVID hit, really, sort of post-pandemic, return to work, return to the learning. How can we make our environments work a little bit harder as we have another look at them, essentially? So what we started to see with a lot of briefs that were coming in around that time is that people were out asking for, outstanding experiences. They needed a leg up on the competition. Inclusivity was this key word that was coming through, and people were using it in very different ways. Some people seem to have a very strong understanding of what it meant to them and their organization. Other people really had no idea at all. They just found it as a buzzword and were kind of throwing it into the brief. So we had to do a little bit of research ourselves to kind of understand and offer guidance, I guess, to people. We didn't want to just see it as a buzzword. We wanted to truly find out what it meant and how we could apply that to different environments. So that was the start of our research piece. So initially it was a couple of months where we just got a brief understanding. Then it became 6 months, and we started to see this transition where we were taking the subject to clients rather than clients bringing it to us. And then it went on for a year, and we started to roll it out to the sales team. And now it's been going on about 3 years at this point. And the conversation is still happening. It's still an exciting, evolving subject. So it's something that we're quite passionate about. We're really pushing, and we think we should integrate it into every single subject. So I guess, why is it still going on? Why are we having a conversation of this? And I guess there's no, bit of a spoiler, but there's no sort of answer to it as such. There's no one product you can put in to make an inclusive environment. There's not even a sort of dedicated palette of product. You really have to integrate it from stage zero and start bringing it through the design process so you can answer the brief at every stage. But I'll try and give you some of those key light bulb moments, some of those pieces in research that I've gone through, that I found that have switched on a light in my head and made me understand a little bit better, and pieces that I've been taking forward to clients and talking about, students, end users, that have really got people on board and made this a subject worthwhile having the conversation about. So that's what I hope you get from this presentation today. So as a starting point, as I say, the subject doesn't have this defined answer. It's so broad. That's the main problem with it, I guess, as a part of a design brief, is that, if you take the definition literally of inclusive environment, it is all kinds of people, everyone. Someone's environment is the circumstances, people, things, events around them. So anyone and everything. So how do you start to define that? And you do find those parallels as well. In student experience, who is a student as an individual? We know they're there to study, to learn, but as an individual, what makes them tick? And that could be something around their subject that's different, or a personal trait. But how do we account for that? Again, massive broad subject. Experience, obviously, that's something very unique to yourself. We can't track someone's every move. We can't understand everything that's going to happen to them during their time at university or their time at work even. So again, we're looking for pinpoints that we can put in this incredibly broad brief. So this is kind of the process that we undertook. So, you start over here and you've got this mess, confusion, lots of information that you can dig into, but there's nothing defined. There's nothing we can take back to our clients or our end users and say, this is what you need to do to answer the brief. So the research project, like I say, started probably 3 years ago at this point, in all this mess. And we've started refining it, researching, finding a few answers along the way, developing new constraints, and eventually we've added some focus to that. So we start to get a more rounded approach now that we can apply to every project. So kind of my first big light bulb moment, it kind of seems obvious when you write it down on a screen like that, but there is no average, and it's something we're guilty of using as university sort of furniture specifiers. We put out questionnaires, we get answers, and we go with the most popular. It's quite a democratic process. But there is no standard for the student. So this is the standard kilogram measure that every other kilo in the world is measured by. And we don't have that. We don't have that for the human brain. We don't have it for the human body, and we don't have it for individuals. So we can't look to that standard. So where do we look? And that's kind of why we turn to the average. So if we have a broad spectrum of people, and we're looking at everyone as such, everyone that might come in contact with our organisation, every potential student, every current student, every staff member, we tend to find a point in the middle and say that that is going to work for everyone. It's closest to each end. A lot of people around this space, a few more here, but they can kind of make do. But that isn't the right way to go about it. So those traditional design constraints we need to start moving away from. So using the average is obviously quite dangerous in some circumstances, a little bit sort of comedic here, but you get the point that if you take that average, people are going to fall through the cracks. So you need to start looking at individual requirements as well as the broad spectrum across there. And I guess the sort of slightly philosophical question is that who is actually average? You take those individual elements that make up a person, and the more you add, the less likely you are to be average. So yeah, there might be quite a few people that are 5'10", 13 stone. You're in a student-focused environment, so straight away you're moving away from the average. You've got mature students, yeah, but you've not got everyone that's 42 in there. Does everyone have the same interest? Do they like football? Do they have disabilities? Do they consider themselves straight, neurotypical? So we need to start looking away from the average, because no one is truly average. So to start answering that, and if we take average as being a design constraint, we need to develop new design constraints. So how do we start to do that? So if we can't use average, what we tend to do is research and put in different pinpoints. So we're looking for variety and choice within the environment, but also adaptability is really good. So if we can find a specific constraint or challenge that someone faces, but also show how that benefits other people, or how that's adaptable within the workspace, other people can change it to suit themselves, that's really good as well. So we can start becoming much closer to a broader range of people. And this is where we sort of put our first line in the sand. So we decided what we wanted inclusive environments to offer. So dignity, confidence, convenience, and comfort. They were our 4 cornerstones. And then where were we going to start looking for these challenges if we're not going to use the average? So physical accessibility. I think that's one that a lot of people get on board with. And it's really important to recognise that inclusive design isn't just about meeting the bare minimums of Equality Acts or DDAs. But physical accessibility is a part of it. Sensory differences, so again, most people think of visual or hearing needs, but also thinking about touch, texture. Neurodiverse conditions is really the one that seems to pique most interest, so I'll touch on that in a little more depth in a minute. But again, thinking about the different ways that people's brains work, the differences in personality and function, and how we can better support people. Injustices are a great place to look, especially within minority groups and needs. And then also you might have specific role, subject, or organisation requirements that are unique to your university, or a specific subject area, specific building that we need to build into this brief as well. So while we're revisiting spaces, we can take all this into consideration. So to say about neurodiversity, it's probably the one that most people are unfamiliar with, and it does seem to be the one that the most discussion is around. So what is neurodiversity? Range of differences in individual brain function, behavioural traits. It is regarded as part of the normal variation in the human population. There's a couple of different outlooks on neurodiversity. One is that everyone is on this neurodiverse spectrum, that they are perfectly normal differences, that everyone should be treated as the same. which, yeah, I'm completely on board with. The other one is that we must recognise still that some of these traits can be disabling. So it shouldn't devalue that, if we need to offer help in certain areas, we still do. And that's essentially where we get our constraints from. So some relevant data to neurodiversity, so that might be autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD. There's a lot that goes into this, and like I say, it might just be personal preferences as well. From day to day, even we can change our mood. Different environments will support us better, but these are some of those areas that we can look at to identify those traits that we can use as design constraints. So just looking at some of those neurodiverse conditions, some of the traits that sit within that. And as I say, we must recognise that some can be disabling, but also if you give someone the right platform, if you think specifically of conditions such as autism, if you give someone the right environment where they might have a social challenge, for example, where they can focus, they can get their mind in the right place, it can actually be a competitive advantage. But if they don't have the right platform, then they won't succeed. So it's important that we allow for that, but then again, that choice and adaptability element that we're bringing into the brief. I think what a lot of people do and why this is such an overwhelming subject is that you start going, yeah, but not everyone can use this element, or you supply for one person but it doesn't work for another, but then vice versa, it doesn't work in the same way. So what we're sort of promoting here is building a foundation, having inclusive design as a strategy. I spoke to one individual, even about their own conditions at the autism show, and they were saying it's a little bit like playing whack-a-mole. Every time you find a need and you rectify it and you think you've got a coping mechanism in place, then another one pops up and you have to do the same again. But if you have this foundation, it's a much better place to work from. And then if any more specific needs come to your attention, or you need to build in another element, it's much easier to do it from that place than starting from scratch. So extending the benefits. Like I say, this is not about meeting the bare minimums of any equality acts. So we need to understand how everyone is benefiting from inclusive environment, because essentially that's what it is, everyone, everything. So the best way that I've found to explain that, or the best explanation that was in place, is the curb cut effect. So thinking of a drop curb. This actually term came from a movement in the 60s where drop curbs didn't exist in America. And there was a group of rebels called the Rolling Quads that went out and actually poured their own concrete to make ramps up and down the curbs. And then obviously that started a movement for inclusivity, and drop curbs became a thing, the curb cuts. So it's now become used as a way to define any sort of disability-friendly feature, if you like, that is used by a wider audience than it was first intended for. So we often see that something that's created for a specific disability or a specific need, a specific constraint, actually offers benefits to other people. So it might make the impossible possible for one person, but it actually might make the already possible much more efficient or much easier for another. So just a bit of a visual example of that. So we've got the curb cut in. Obviously the wheelchair user is who that was designed for, so it allows them to access and change that level easily. But who else could benefit? So if you're pushing a buggy, you can benefit. If you're delivery driver, cyclist, it arguably is even demarking just a safe place to cross the road. So it's benefit for everyone. And then also you've got different levels of situation, I guess. So permanent, the wheelchair user is always using their wheelchair, so they will benefit from it all the time. But a temporary situation, this guy at the back here with a walking stick, maybe he's broke his leg, he'll be fine in 6 weeks' time. But while he has that injury, this is actually really beneficial to him. And situational, at the moment, these parents are out with their child in the pram. It's not the case that they are all the time, but in that situation, they are benefiting as well. It becomes a much more efficient process, and we can give these principles to our interior spaces as well. Just a few examples. I think once you're aware of the curb cut, you do actually start seeing it around quite a lot. So I think push buttons are a really good example. I've been walking along with my hands full of bags. Give it a tap with your elbow so you can get in. Not intended for you, but it is benefiting you in that situation. And always try and drop in an educational example for universities. So turn on the subtitles tops. some really interesting stats actually on people using subtitles now. So like I think 80% of content on Facebook is consumed with subtitles because of the environment in which it's being consumed in. So people are looking at their phones, don't want to disturb others or don't want others hearing what they're listening to, so put on the subtitles. Again, it wasn't designed to help them in that situation, but it really does benefit them, both as an educational tool and as a tool in their day-to-day life. So it's recognizing those extended benefits that we find from those constraints that we're finding. So observe with empathy. I think this was a really big point, and it started looking at environments slightly differently. As especially us walking around environments with clients around universities. So what the sort of the quote, I guess, that changed my view a little bit is that, you know, I think we see disability as a problem, as a health problem. But if we move away from that and don't see it as a problem for the person, we need to look at it as an interaction between people and place. You know, so you start thinking of staircases, where you're positioning them. Are you creating stigma with certain pieces of furniture that can't be accessed? You know, how are people interacting with these pieces? Not, oh, they're unable to use this because. Just think of it as an interaction and observe how people are using those spaces. And you do start to see different benefits, both in layout, furniture selection, or even the wider environment as well. So definitely viewing as an interaction is important. And recognising exclusion, again, we sort of touched on it in the neurodiversity piece. So equality is so often seen as giving people the same tools, you know, whether that is the same chair in a classroom, the same table, but that doesn't always give people the same opportunities. So if we recognise their constraints, their challenges, we can provide better tools for the job. So quick cycling example here that was used for health. But if we give everyone the same bike, it excludes some people completely. Other people are uncomfortable. There might be the odd person that fits as the average that is perfect. But if we recognise their differences and those potential exclusions, we can actually provide the right equipment to allow them the same opportunities. And again, that applies completely to the internal environment. We need to give those different settings and environments that allow people to extract the best from themselves, whether that's self-directed or different areas they can use at different times of day. The space analysis as well, looking internally, is really important for locating different functions. So a lot of people do this anyway, perhaps not as consciously. And what we've developed alongside some of our clients is a series of checklists that you can start on sort of day one of your project, make sure everyone's on the same page and they can follow that through the entire process. So light's really important when we think about visual. So we can look at areas of high contrast, areas of low contrast, where there's low saturation of light, where we might need to provide user-controlled lighting, but they might also be really useful for those quiet focus spaces as well. So we're locating those activities correctly. Thinking about disturbance and sound. Again, where are those pockets of usable space that we can utilize and exploit to create the best out of the environment, you know, work with the architecture rather than against it. And again, access, thinking about it in a visual and a physical way. So, you know, our orientation space is clear. Is it intuitive in use as well as being accessible? They're all key considerations that build a more inclusive environment. And I think critiquing as well. So often walk around university spaces and, you know, the spin image on the right, especially, you know, you get this criticism that this individual is using a space that's meant for 6 people, that they've got their wire trailing across the floor, you know, they're not using the space in the right way. But there's probably a reason for that. You know, are you providing enough individual spaces for this person to focus that has a bit of protection, enclosure, privacy? Are you creating the right connectivity? So I think if you interrogate your own space in a different way, look for those opportunities, constraints, you know, the opportunities that you're not giving people, recognize that exclusion, and that can really help in the development and the next steps you take with your environment. So that's kind of within the university bubble. But there's obviously a lot of influences outside of that. So within our industry, there are pieces of guidance that we can lean on, and they were the starting point for a lot of our research. even smart working, design for the mind is the most current. So neurodiversity is being acknowledged now for the built environment. I mentioned the Equality Act before, it does create one of those cornerstones. An accessible, inclusive environment. So they're good references, they're good resources. They're not necessarily the most inspiring pieces. So something that again is within our industry, but is a lot more accessible, principles of inclusive design. So I wish I'd found this a lot earlier on in the process. It would have saved me quite a bit of time. But there's some really good redefined principles. So place people at the heart of the design process, acknowledge diversity and difference. And we've explained a little bit of how to do that and develop those constraints. Offer choice and variety, where a single solution cannot accommodate all users. Provide flexibility, so again, that adaptability element. And a space that is convenient and enjoyable for everyone to use. Again, really important principles listed out, lots of research behind it. So it's not just us saying that other people are coming to similar conclusions, even if they're not defining how to reach that end goal. I think what a lot of students especially will come back to, especially the Gen Z, is that there is this wider collective shift in media. Fashion industry is becoming much more inclusive. We're seeing different ways advertising is used. Disabilities are seen within advertising, but they're not just advertising that feature. So there's a really interesting podcast I listened to a while ago, and it's saying about how the only times you would see disabled individuals on telly a lot of time was things like Children in Need or Comic Relief, but that integration has become much better now. So you're being exposed to a lot more, and there's a more inclusive feeling throughout media. So a lot of people are seeing that as a collective shift out in wider society. So we need to start reflecting that in kind in our environments. And changing attitudes as well on the back of that. I always use Rose from Strictly Come Dancing as an example. So obviously you think of not being able to hear the music as sort of very restricting to a dance routine, that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do it even, keep rhythm and keep time. But there was very small adaptations made to the show, and they were quite open. It's all the sign language being used on the show itself, and it just sort of made you aware and just twigged something that actually with minor adaptations, people can really surprise you, and you shouldn't come with predefined expectations of an individual's abilities, because they can A, surprise themselves, and B, surprise others as they go around. So again, just thinking about providing that platform for everyone, that level for success, and people can really achieve no matter what their constraints are. So there's a lot of movements that people can get behind now as well. So We the 15 is a really good one. So 15% of the world's population are seen as having a disability. That's obviously a huge number worldwide. So you're opening up the spaces to more students, more staff. Your pool of recruitment is much larger if you start to have a look at disability and provide some of these different environments. If you're more inclusive and accessible, just the numbers are staggering. But it's also a cause that people can rally behind, and we're seeing more momentum built behind it. And then, in the World Cup, in the Premier League, you see this, the tag word of inclusion coming around a lot. So whether it's taking the knee, what you're fighting for, LGBTQ plus rights, and the Olympics as well was a really good place where you started seeing, the sort of trigger word of inclusivity. So it is putting in people's mindsets in all sorts of environments, different settings. And again, we want to reflect that in our own environments. So thinking about the Olympics as well, what we did find was the learning legacy from London 2012, which spoke really loudly. So you started seeing quite a few of these newspaper clippings when the Paralympics was starting in 2012. So the Olympics are coming home. So you started to wonder about this sort of national legacy, this national pride, if you like, of where did the Paralympics come from? So actually the first Paralympics was seen as the Soap Mandible Games. So it was on the same day as the opening day of the London Olympics back in 1948. And it was that hope and inspiration piece, further friendship and understanding. It was injured servicemen and women in its first instance. but it gave a platform and opportunities to people to succeed and compete and, you know, work in sport together for a better future. And our legacy that's been left of that is obviously the Olympic Park. It's a great resource to look at. You can find lots of inspiration within the materials, both before and after the games that were put together, to show how it was built with inclusivity in mind. So, you know, before the games, it was part of the brief that they wanted to be remembered as the most inclusive games ever, you know, both for disabled groups and general public, so those visitors to the stadiums. And I think the Olympic Stadium is a really good example as well, that sometimes when you think that you're designing with constraints found in disabilities, that somehow it makes it a worse environment for those that consider themselves able-bodied or neurotypical. And it's just not the case. I don't think I've ever watch the Olympics and think, oh, you know, how terrible is that stadium? It's been designed for the Paralympics as well as the Olympics. It's just not the case. It does genuinely make it better for everyone. Again, in the marketing materials following the Olympics, so when it became a public park, they started adding in a lot of the inclusive environment elements. So even, you know, getting around, different call points, quiet spaces, areas that you could go to. You could choose your environment within the park. So if you do get the opportunity to visit or just have a look at some of the materials, it's a really good starting point for getting some inspiration on how inclusivity can grade into a project. And there is the learning legacy on the back of that as well. So those lessons learned have been defined, and those principles that I read out before about placing people at the heart, etc., they've actually come from this once it was transferred from the Office for Disability over to the CIC. So a fantastic resource. So if you can't do it for organisation, those benefits for students, you know, if you don't want to buy into the learned legacy, I think the last point I learned really is do it for yourself. Find those needs in yourself and give yourself that platform for success. So often when we talk about student experience specifically, I think we gloss over staff. You know, we don't think about their new ways of working since the return to work and the pandemic. So, you know, we've got a few facts and figures on people returning, but how are they turning? You know, are they permanent home workers now, hybrid workers, workplace-based, mobile workers? Is it a combination of all four? So definitely start looking at your staff spaces as well since the return, because that will have a big impact on your student experience. So the future you, so generally, as we said, those benefits extend, so you get increased autonomy, efficiency, choice, comfort, which I think everyone would be on board with as wanting. Slightly doom and gloom, it's all downhill from 40. So, you know, some of your senses start to deteriorate. Maybe not as relevant to students, but certainly older students and staff members. You know, this will support you for longer if you integrate these into these internal environments. And again, 86% of people with a disability acquire their disability during their working lives. So thinking about that interaction piece, you know, the way you interact with your working environment tomorrow could be very different from how it is today, which is slightly catastrophizing. But if you think of it in that way, you'd want it to support yourself. So definitely integrating now, creating that foundation again, you know, the sort of whack-a-mole approach that we said about, will support yourself in the future as well. Commercial aspect, I'm always a little bit shy of it, but absolutely shouldn't be. So, you know, as we move into this new world, you know, diversity of thought is a big issue, finding solutions to new challenges. And if your environment is more inclusive, you're going to have more individuals that have different sort of perspectives on life. They see the world through different windows. And that's really important to that problem solving piece and obviously the progression of the university. A workers market, so more students, more staff members that are able to use your spaces. Again, we talked about that We the 15, opening your doors to that extra 15%, you know, keeps your recruitment pool open. Stronger public images, you know, don't be afraid to advertise in this. Like you said, Pantene, Jaw, they're all using a more inclusive approach to market their products. I don't see why that should be any different for universities. Definitely shout about this. And, you know, as a result of that, it becomes a more attractive organisation to potential and existing students. It's a place that you can really take pride in. And then I always sort of close with this, but I believe inclusive design is great design. I think that's why the conversation has continued for so long. I think that's why we shouldn't be afraid to be challenged on this. And please do, if you want to put comments in that challenge anything that's been said or add another layer to it. But I don't think any process or any project should be built, any brief should be built without inclusive design in mind. It's the right thing to do. It benefits everyone. You know, it incorporates everyone, and I think that diversity of thought, the cultural piece, bringing people together is really important. So finding those constraints, restricting yourself within the design of finding solutions is really important. That's what design is all about, is, you know, problem solving before anything goes in place. So I just believe that inclusive design is great design, and you know, if there's no other reason to do it, then that should be the one. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that was helpful in some way. I hope there's a few little takeaways for you. As I say, please feel free to continue the conversation now in the comments if you've got any questions. Have a look at SouthernsBroadstock.co.uk for more information. There's a few pieces on there that you can refer to, or please contact myself if you have any specific queries. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lee, for that. It's a really excellent presentation. I'm sure our members got a lot out of that. I got just one question that was sort of sent to me earlier, if you don't mind, and it was regarding sort of universities, a culturally diverse space. Obviously, there's a lot of people from different places in the world, sort of different religions, etc. I just wondered if there's anything that you've looked at into sort of designing spaces that help to include sort of people, you know, from different cultural backgrounds as well.
Yeah, as a cultural piece, obviously there's not a specific piece of furniture that you can specify as such. But if there are needs for facilities, you know, it's removing stigma from them, I think, is really important in the cultural piece and the integration. So you may still need those spaces for prayer, for reflection, but again, looking at those wider benefits, you know, how can we label that differently? How can we remove stigma? So that's how I think you bring those cultural pieces together. You know, if you are thinking of different backgrounds, there's different ways of lighting that can better reflect people's skin tones. You know, this is the kind of depth we're getting into. To allow everyone to be comfortable in their environment and reflect their different aspects of their personality, their appearance, their background in different ways.
That's good, thank you, Lee. We just had a question regarding whether the slides and presentation will be shared, and we have recorded the session, so we will be sharing it out to all attendees of the meeting. There's no further questions at the minute. I'll just give it another sort of 30 seconds just to see if any more questions pop up. And while we wait for that, I'd just like to sort of thank Lee and Darren for your time again. We do appreciate that. And just to give people on the call a little bit of a heads up that we're working towards possibly doing sort of future sessions and making this into a series. This one has gone really well for us, and this was a little bit of a test one, a bit of an introduction. Obviously, we're potentially looking at further episodes in the series where we'll go into some of the topics in a little bit more detail with potential sort of more different people on the call, sort of different experts to help us that. But yeah, there's no further questions come through, so I think we will probably end it there and just say once again thank you for your time, much appreciated, and thanks to everybody that attended.
No, thank you, Sam. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone.